Good morning, everyone. My name is Bridget Richardson, and I'm with the Nesti Center for Faith and Culture at University of St. Thomas in Houston. And I'm here again with the dynamic duo, Father Donald Nesti, founder of the Nesti Center for Faith and Culture, and Dr. Don Frohlich, professor of biology at UST. So thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And today we're entering into a dialogue about values, science, technology, and society. So let's jump right in. Father Nesti, if you'll explain that a little bit.
Okay. Bridget, thank you again. And thank you, Dawn, for being here. In 1988, when I left Duquesne University, I took a sabbatical for a year and a half. And I wrote to the president of Stanford University and asked him if I could come there and just be like a kid in a sandbox, using all the toys that they had, namely attending any undergraduate course that I thought I would be interested in, any graduate course or any seminar. And he said, absolutely, please come, as long as you clear it with a professor. He said, we would welcome that. So I was like a kid in a sandbox. And the first course, I was looking for a program to attach myself to. And the reason I went to Stanford was I found this department, which was called the Department of Values, Values, Technology, Science, and Society. And I thought, wow, this is really what I'm looking for. I want to go to a secular university. I want it to be private. I want it to be highly technological. And I want it to be a university which had students from all over the world. And almost 60% of the student body at that time was from different countries, especially developing countries, coming there to prepare themselves to be leadership in their countries, whether it was in the business world or whether it was in the governmental world. So Jim Hayes, who was the director of the program at the time, welcomed me with open arms, and he said, okay, just go for it. Whatever you want to do, just go for it. So I said, well, I want to take the core courses in the program itself. And he said, well, the first one you're going to take then is History 101 and a technological track. And that this history and technological track will be studying Western history from the point of view of how technology changed the formation of the history. Naturally, one being gunpowder, having come from the Chinese, of course, the invention of the compass, the invention of the water clock, and so forth. And even military technology that developed, and we studied that in relationship to the economics of the day and what that cost and how these wars cost and everything else. And we even studied things like architecture, and particularly Gothic architecture as it came about in France, and the significance of that, and the flying buttress and so forth. So I was in the course with 125 freshman students at Stanford, and I loved it. And I'd see this older guy. At that time, I was about 57, 58. And I'm sitting there, and they'd come in and look at me, and I'd start my chit-chat with them. And I came to know some of them, and even during lunchtime, we would have discussions about what they were studying and where we were going with this thing. The reason I chose that program was to see what basis they used for ethical decisions in the use of technology and their understanding of science. And that's why the program was called Values, Technology, Science, and Society. And actually, they made a clear distinction between technology and society and science. Science being, as Dr. Frohlich can describe it much better than myself, taking the evidence that we see empirical evidence and looking for paradigms that give us meaning about what we really see. And then out of that, we have the opportunity to develop various technologies which are going to influence the way we live. So I stayed there a year and a half, and I enjoyed every minute. I went to seminars on economics and the economics of education particularly, and I went to the Hoover Center, Hoover Institute, which was concerning itself with food questions around the world. And I met a wonderful professor there who was a Greek Orthodox professor, Paniatopoulos. And he and I had many, many conversations. And he even introduced me to various seminars that were taking place at the University of California, Berkeley, where he was honored. And we had a long, long relationship. He had even gone in his trips to India. He had even gone to into Mother Teresa's, wanted to go into where Mother Teresa was working, but he said he couldn't even get beyond the boundary because of the smell and the odor of the place where she was working, and it was very, very repelling for him. But he was a great man, and I learned so much from him, particularly with regard to population concerns and food in the world and the studies that they were entering into. All of this was by way of setting the stage for my interest in the relationship between faith and culture. And later on, in reading particularly Romano Guardini's The End of the Modern World, and its sequel, which is Power and Responsibility, he makes a big point in there that the two questions we are going to have to face more than anything else as we go forward is the use of power and how technology is related to the use of that power in our present situation. The more that power becomes autonomous and the subsequent development of technology from that power is going to place us in a situation which is increasingly dangerous for the whole world. And that's why I think this whole question of faith and culture that we address in our center is so critical to where we're going now. And as I said the last time, the course that Dr. Frohlich teaches on faith and science is of absolute import to the students who come into the program. So I think maybe today in our dialogue, we can look at this question of science, technology, power, and see where we are really going with this. As I told you the other night, I was watching PBS on the question of genetics, and at the end, I think they referred to a Chinese scientist who had cloned something. Don, you probably know more about that than I do. And it sent a chill up my spine to see where they were going with this thing without any sense that there would be a power beyond us that demands the responsibility for the care of all of creation and in an integrally ecologically way as Pope Francis talks about it. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Maybe we can even back up a bit. And so Dr. Frohlich, you could talk about that difference between science and technology from what Father Nesti was kind of talking about.
Well, excuse me. Yes. So Father Nesti, I think pretty much hit it right on the nose about talking about technology. And certainly we use technological tools in science, but the technology is largely an applied outgrowth of what we do in science. It interested me very much when you were describing the technological advancements, you said gunpowder the water clock. What was
Compass.
the other? The compass and
military weapons
and military weapons.
Architecture.
Right.
All these things.
Because when I'm thinking like a scientist, and I'm covering, I don't know, roughly the same period of time, and I'm thinking, so what were really the big advances? In my world, they would have been Galileo, Darwin. They definitely would have been different. Einstein and quantum theory, and I think that one of the things that an old my philosophy of science professor as an undergraduate at the College of Idaho used to say to us, and he was a Presbyterian minister, did his PhD in philosophy of science at Duke, and he told us, he said, if you think about science, it's the job of science is to explain the universe in the smallest number of testable hypotheses possible. And that's a good general way, I think, of looking at it. Technology is a very focused, and now is certainly more than ever economically driven, which makes it power driven. It's simply shifted from military economic power to a more purely economic power. And I'm not knocking technology, because what technology has applied has allowed science to look even deeper into the nature of the universe. But one of the, you brought up something I think that is really important, and is especially important right now, and that is this issue of interest, of power that are meeting head on. Very soon, we have a planet. You could describe the entire planet, if you had that knowledge, in terms of currently so much energy and currently so much matter. Okay, all this predicated on my assumption that every bit of that is relational, but there is a finite amount. Now you have a whole lot of people, and you have a whole lot of people in trouble, in big trouble, because the techno-economic interests of the major powers on the planet, their normal way of doing things is threatened by this particular disease. But this is also converging on another world, forefront to another world that does not have that power. There is a major disastrous famine, as you probably know, that is developing in East Africa. In fact, they're right at the beginning of it, the likes of which has not been seen for a long, long time. That's because that area is under major drought, as is India. So what are we talking about? We're talking about food supplies on the one hand being threatened across the world, and supply chains. So in this relational universe, what do we do? How does this power play out? Do we fight to, and I mean fight in the broadest sense, to maintain our way of consuming a limited amount of resource? Or do we change? I'm very unconvinced that the real question here is, I'm very unconvinced that it is a fix it or not question. It is, do we change our point of view and finally get the idea that this is a relational perspective that has to be changed at a ground level? This is about Imago Dei. The virus doesn't care. The planet doesn't care. The planet has been through many extinctions and 7 major extinctions. Now, I'm not preaching doom and gloom, because on every single side of extinction, there has been absolutely incredible diversification, radiation, change, newness, creation. We are faced with an opportunity if we'll simply open and frame to the opportunity. I want to make very sure I'm not being apocalyptic. I am being apocalyptic to a certain way of thinking. I don't see that as apocalyptic. But you know, there's one thing about nature, one thing about the universe, and at least in I try to understand, I don't understand, but I try to experience the creator in my world, that is God, as a verb. The universe is dynamic. There is not a status quo. There has never been a status quo, ever. I can't look at the history of the universe astronomically, physically, or biologically and say, this is the way things should be because this is the way things are, because those are-ness are always changing. They are becoming. And I don't know if I went off on the deep end with you, but there is a lot going on right now. And I think if we will put aside have a real discussion about where the real interests are right now for every human, for every living creature on this planet.
Well, that's why I think I certainly would recommend to everybody to read Romana Guardini's book, Power and Responsibility. And the essential point there is that when you skew the relationship between creator and creature, when the creature begins to assume an autonomy that should be there but in a limited way, and continues to deny a force larger than that, then what happens is that the creature becomes turned in on the self. The problem that we're facing with power right now is, and its misuse, if I might say so, and I think, and you know, this is why the Pope is so insistent in Laudato Si, you know, let the universe be praised, let God be praised, which is taken from St. Francis's own hymn to the creation and creatures. It is that people don't want to see us going beyond natural ecology, which is that of what I would say, the scientific way of looking at the nature. And they want to get rooted in human ecology, which Pope Benedict talked about when he was talking about the nature of the family and relationships and what marriage is all about, and so forth and so on. Francis has come now with integral ecology. And what he is saying is that we can no longer look at this thing piecemeal. Just as a society will fall apart on individualized self-interest fighting each other, so too will other systems, which are larger group self-interests, fight each other, either in the political realm or the economic realm, and not take into consideration that the whole of creation is a living whole. It is a whole living whole. This is why we call it integral. And what we are working with is systems here. And then that calls into perspective what you were saying, Don. Everything is related. This is why when you do family counseling, or marriage counseling, you cannot do it apart from taking into consideration family systems, the in-laws and the outlaws in a family, the the strong people in the family, the weak people in the family, carrying their own kinds of addictions into the relationships and bringing what we would call the viper's tangle. And the viper's tangle, it gets in there and puts one against the other in such a way that you cannot come to an integrated family structure. So if we take family systems and look at them, generations which have preceded and handed on these attitudes, et cetera, we will have the same difficulty taking into consideration how wonderful business producing this product also has an impact on the water quality of the context in which it is working and what that is having on and the impact on these people's lives. Why is it that we cannot get together really what I would call the social ecologists, the biological ecologists, and the spiritual ecologists, and have them related in such a way that we're looking at a larger picture? This is where the challenge is going to come. And the Pope, in that Laudato Si, if you read it over and over, he is telling us that we are at a crossroads. We are at a crossroads. And the choice has to be made how we are going to use our capacity to make things happen. That's the definition of power. The definition of power is the capacity to make things happen and change. Therefore, power carries with it a tremendous responsibility in the way that we are facing the future. Whether global warming is part of the natural ecology and natural development of this planet from its center out, or whether it is also being brought upon us by air pollution, et cetera, we have to face the fact that we are the only ones, as you say so rightly, Don. We're the only ones who can do this.
And I have a question too about, people who they understand what you're saying, but they feel powerless. They're not empowered to make a change in any way that they think is effective. How would you say to that person to first develop this view of the world as relational and then use the power within your own capacity that you do have?
Boy, that's a whole other, that is a beautiful question and an excellent question. I don't know, because there are many who do feel powerless. Part of what you're talking about and very much of what Father is talking about, something tells me that one of the beauties, one of the gifts in my life has been being mentored and surrounded by people. And Father, at least one of these, my quantum physicist friend in France, he's a brilliant man. And I'm just going to say it. I think that the key to real power, it seems to me that ultimately lasts for good, is humility. And that's a humility. When we think about humility, and I always hate bringing the word up because I'm not humble, and I don't want to talk about how to define it, because then you get into, are you looking in the mirror and why aren't you there, and how distorted you're, all this kind of thing. But what my mentors teach me is, by their example, by the way, is they are very capable of saying two things, and I mean saying it to the core. One, I don't know. And not only do I not know, there's probably a lot out there that I don't know that I don't know. However, I am willing to learn. I am willing to deconstruct what I know to somehow get that much closer to a truth about the universe in my world, a truth about nature. I'm not looking for things these things aren't new. I mean, it's kind of like you at Stanford. As a very young kid, I was just turned loose in nature. And I feel like I'm a kid in a candy store, and now I'm almost 65. And it's not over. It's become, the candy store has gotten larger and larger and larger. We need to get to a place that we can come into and say, look, there's a whole lot that in fact, there are very many things that I don't know. And that I am not only a child of God, I am a child in God's universe. I'm not God. And I'm willing to learn my place. I'm willing to learn my part. And not only that, I'm willing to act my part. And that sounds very high and mighty and preachy, but I don't know any other way to approach that conversation. I really don't.
Well, let me say this, Don. Everything that you said is right on, and to respond to you, Bridget, that's precisely why the Center for Faith and Culture was founded, to help people be able to see what their responsibility is, and to the extent that they can engage that responsibility in the context in which they find themselves, limited though it may be. It is a deeply spiritual question. And listen to this, Don. I'm reading from an article by this Invey. What did he close with in his what do you call it, power and responsibility? Guardini closed with an intriguing intuition, and this is also in the end of the modern world, that as people become ever more governed by forces they cannot control, they would turn to a great man, in quotation marks. His imagined leader, that is Guardini's imagined leader, whether in the world of politics or religion, he does not say, understands, quote, how to subordinate power to the true meaning of human life and works. Free from the modern dogma of progress, comfortable with technology but not enthralled to it, and thus capable of establishing an authority that respects human dignity and creating a social order in which God, quote, is acknowledged as the living norm and point of reference for all existence, close quote. The great man or woman needed for our times, he concluded, would be able to grasp, and here's his quote, Christianity's inmost secret, colon, humility. There you are, Don. And that humility is the truthfulness of who you are as a creature. It begins there. It ends there. But the same pride that wanted to determine good and evil for itself that we have in the myth of the garden continues to reign in our lives. And unless humility is there, and humility is the recognition of limits and finitude and fragmentariness, we will just push our techne devices, thinking that they are going to be the remedy for everything. So, Bridget, I really think that the responsibility of the church today is to help people to discover that humility. And that's not an easy thing, because we are all bought into an ideology which we try to make our Christianity. Why do people whom we consider economic conservatives, let's put it that way, get upset when the Pope says, you know, you have a tremendous responsibility here worldwide. They're going to have a drought in East Africa. They're going to have a drought in India. What are you proposing to do besides genetically changing the seeds that you have and giving them to somebody else, and you don't know where this is going to go, and then you're charging for those? Don, you have to explain that a little bit more.
Oh no. But you know, you've referred to Pope Francis and Laudato Si, and not just Laudato Si. I mean, the very first thing that I remember Pope Francis doing was not what he wrote and what he said. Was the very first thing that he did was he just simply walked over and removed the boundaries. He just said, look, I'm not living in the papal apartments, isolated and alone. I'm living with you guys. And you know, some nights I like to cook marinara. And so I do. That's living with humility. You can talk about anything that he's written and all the people he's made mad and all the ideologies that he's offended.
And when he came out on the balcony after he was elected, he kneels down and says to the people, pray over me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that there was part of the world that went, Maron, here we go. This is going to get bad. Trust me.
Or that he has removed the title of Vicar of Christ. Did you know that up until I think it was Innocent III or Paul III, who was the Pope during the beginning of the Council of Trent, the only title that the Pope would use as vicar was Vicar of Peter. And later on, I think it may have been Hildebrand who added Vicar of Christ. So the Pope now has taken that title out. He said, we will no longer use that. There's an arrogance about this. I'm not going to use that. I'm the Bishop of Rome. And then a cardinal was very upset because he said that has theological implications. And it certainly does. I would agree with the cardinal on that. But the implications are that you're not Christ. And he is trying to say, and the cardinal was upset by saying that when the Pope speaks, it should be Christ. And of course, then we had Pio IX, Pius IX, who wanted infallibility to be defined as a dogma because the papacy had lost all the papal states and everything else. So you can see how even the struggle within the church for the humility. And interestingly enough, it was Innocent III who approved St. Francis and his ragamuffins to found an order. And he was very aristocratic. I mean, the Pope was very aristocratic. I mean, he enjoyed all of that papal pomp and circumstance, but he saw the truth in Francis.
Well, I do love this guy, and I'm chuckling because in the catechism I had to memorize the Vicar of Christ on earth, and my mother and I, and she's 85, have argued about what the hell that term means, and this has precipitated many a heated discussion between, and I love Mom and she loves me, between. But all I can think of is if the cardinal was, perhaps there were too many lumps of sugar in the cardinal's coffee. I do, and I think that is how we say, I am part of, and we are part of. This is about we.
Yeah, and if you aren't called, if you don't really understand that you're called to be transformed into the image of Christ, it means that you empty yourself. It's the emptying process. It's a kinetic process, kenosis, to empty the self in service for others. He didn't hold on to his divinity to do that. He took the form of a slave. That's Paul.
Well, I certainly, as a leader, I certainly look to, I don't look to ideologists. I'd rather look for a transformed criminal, because at least I know this person has lived. But you know, I don't know.
Right. Could I go back to that? Could I go back to that systemic thing that we were talking about? Because I think this is really important.
And we have a couple minutes left.
Okay, can I read this chapter, this paragraph? Okay, it's from Laudato Si. Nature cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves or as a mere setting in which we live. We are part of nature, included in it and thus in constant interaction with it. Recognizing the reasons why a given area is polluted requires a study of the workings of society, its economy, its behavior patterns, and the ways it grasps reality. Given the scale of change, it is no longer possible to find a specific, discrete answer for each part of the problem. It is essential to seek comprehensive solutions that consider the interactions within natural systems themselves and with social systems. But rather, we are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis that is both social and environmental. Strategies for a solution demand an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time, protecting nature. Now, we could take that and break that open for days in a class.
I say we do it next week. I love this.
All right.
Thank you both.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you both so much for this conversation, and we'll be in touch to pick a topic next week and maybe go from that. And Laudato Si, I love it.
Okay.
And Bridget, you're great. You're wonderful.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Yes.
I'm sure it just makes everybody happy when you see you.
Bye-bye.
Exactly.
Well, y'all have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.